Did you need a picture ID to get a library card in Greco-Roman days? Did the ancient world accept as unforgivable sin any talking out loud with any librarian such as Miriam? What fine am I looking at for a scroll 2,000 years overdue? These and other questions will be answered right after this. I am Professor Jerome Arkenberg, and I've been teaching a wide variety of history courses at colleges across this country for the past 30 years. In this video, I'm going to tell you about when and where the first public libraries were founded in the Greco-Roman world, including the library at Alexandria, the layout and plan of these libraries, along with their collections, who used these libraries and how, and what happened to these libraries, at least in terms of survival and destruction. At the end, I'll have the wrap-up quote on this video. But first, make sure to click like, share, and especially subscribe, and the little bell thingy, so I can continue to bring you more great videos just like this one. The first library in Greece, public or private, is said to have been that of Aristotle at the Lyceum. Actually, would have been pronounced Lyceum, but all right. The Lyceum, as reported by the geographer Strabo, with the conceit that neither the Egyptians nor Assyrians, much less the Babylonians or anyone else in the Near East, had anything similar. Architecturally, Aristotle's library was said to have consisted of a Museion for the scholars, a little stoa next to this Museion, and a lower stoa, as shown here, as well as a garden and the walkway and the buildings around the garden. Though this description dates from nearly 300 years after Aristotle's death, and the Lyceum itself was a public sanctuary and Gymnasion, not Aristotle's property, nor that of the scholars who met and taught there later. However, there is no evidence in Athens from before the 3rd century BC of the existence of a library as an institution, as a place not just where books were stored, but where scholars and students could go, read, and discuss them with others. And yes, they seem to have had a photocopier, at least. Isn't that what's going on here? Hard to say. But during this time, in the Hellenistic world, we do know that books and documents were becoming more common for both individuals and governments, as society had been shifting from an oral memorial one to a documentary model. And gymnasia were starting to include book collections to educate not just a young man's body, but also his mind. At the same time, there is also the emergence of the public archive, such as the Metron in Athens, as shown here, where written laws, decrees, court decisions, deeds, and other public documents were stored and available for public viewing. So, in these first public libraries, scrolls were kept in stacks, open only to staff, largely slaves, who retrieved them for readers to consult in the main reading room, not unlike a modern research library archive for those who have ever used one. The largest of these libraries was that in Alexandria, Egypt, with over 400,000 scrolls. Founded by Ptolemy II Philadelphos, who reigned from 285 to 246 BC, and run by his successors thereafter, until the library was accidentally burned to the ground by Julius Caesar's troops when he was besieged in Alexandria in 48 BC. Though, since the books were only accessible to the scholars attached to the Museion, not quite a university, but perhaps something like it, perhaps this was not a truly public library. Nonetheless, Strabo describes this library as part of the Museion, as I said, a kind of university, which also included a walkway, an exedra, and a large hall in which there was a dining room for the Museion scholars. To some degree, kind of like a predecessor of, say, a monastery, without the church, of course, or maybe your typical English college. Anyway, this format became the model for others at Antioch, Pergamon, and possibly at Pella and Macedon. Callimachos, drawn here much centuries later, Callimachos, the library's first director, created a catalog for its holdings, perhaps the first such library catalog in history, certainly the model for all future ones, the Pinakes, or tables of all those who were eminent in any kind of literature and of their writings in 120 books, quote-unquote. Really an annotated bibliography of every work of Greek history, drama, law, poetry, philosophy, oratory, rhetoric, medicine, science, and miscellany, at least of his time. Callimachos, or perhaps another, seems to have also set up shelf lists, showing what works were where on which shelves in the library, probably as tablets or inscriptions on the library walls, or even on the shelves themselves, with an example found at Rhodes from about 100 BC. And here on these things you can sort of see the description of how this would have worked. At Pergamon, the capital of the kingdom of Pergamon, which had been founded in the 3rd century BC, and it became an important Roman ally and then a Roman province from 133 BC onwards. A city of over 200,000 people, culturally rivaled only by Antioch in Syria and Alexandria in Egypt, King Eumenes II established his own Museion, to which was attached a library holding some 200,000 scrolls, consisting of 4 rooms, and you can see this here in the description of 4 different rooms here, including a large reading room of about 44.5 by 50 feet, and a 10-foot-high statue of Athena. Though again, this was only open to the scholars of the Pergamon Museion. Under Roman rule, the library fell into neglect, and in 43 BC, Mark Antony seized the entire collection and sent it to restock the library at Alexandria as a quote-unquote gift to his new bride, Cleopatra, though some of the scrolls, perhaps half, were restored by Augustus after his victory over Antony and Cleopatra. Another major library was founded by the Seleukid emperor Antiochus the Great around 221 BC at its capital, Antioch, which is a really small city, modern Antakya in Turkey today. Anyway, Antioch, this Seleukid Imperial library, held about 30,000 scrolls. And while Antioch did not have its own Museion, this Imperial Seleukid library was still only open to scholars and students. However, in an effort to curry favor with the Christians of Antioch, the Roman Emperor Jovian, who had succeeded Julian the Apostate, Julian, who had been raised Christian and then converted back to paganism. Anyway, Jovian, quote, at the urging of his wife, ordered the destruction of the Trianion, which Julian had converted to a library, burned the temple with all the books in it, with his concubines laughing and setting the fire, but failed completely. Not only the pagans, but also the Christians interpreted this as a barbaric act. Unquote. Sometime after 117 AD, the Roman consul Gaius Julius Aquila, in memory of his father, who had been proconsul of Asia, Tiberius Julius Celsus Pantainos, founded the library of Celsus in Ephesus, holding not only Celsus's body in the library's crypt, but also 12,000 scrolls. But this library, as depicted here in an artist's reconstruction, was unfortunately destroyed in 262 AD, probably by an earthquake, and never rebuilt. Other public libraries were founded in the 2nd century AD in the Greek half of the Roman Empire at, well, there was a library of Kos on the island of Kos, and the library of Rhodes, plans shown here, built as part of the Gymnasion there. Also, the library of Pantainos in Athens, built by Titus Flavius Pantainos around 102 AD, which existed until Athens was sacked and burned by the Germanic Heruli in 267 AD. Also, the library of Hadrian in Athens, seen here, reconstructed along with the floor plan, as part of the Emperor Hadrian's Athenian reconstructions, which unfortunately was also seriously damaged by the Heruli in 267 AD. Though, unlike Pantainos' library, it was repaired later. Of course, there were doubtless private collections of books in the houses of individuals throughout the Greek East, from at least the time of Aristotle, if not earlier, but probably not as a dedicated library. And the same in the Roman West from at least the 3rd century BC. But the first dedicated library known in the Roman West was that of the general and consul Lucius Licinius Lucullus. Another known private library was one which was built around 50 BC and survived intact to the present day, more or less, via the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, the villa of the Papyri in Pompeii. As you can see here, reconstructed along with a floor plan. This was a single large room or hall off a small colonnade around a peristyle garden, not dissimilar to rooms off colonnaded peristyle gardens of other large villas or townhouses. In 42 BC, Julius Caesar entrusted the scholar and bibliophile Marcus Terentius Varro, infamous for his own large library, to establish a state-supported public library for a literate population who needed to read or consult various historical, literary, or philosophical texts, but who could not afford a collection of their own. Unfortunately, these plans came to naught with Caesar's assassination in 44 BC. So it was that one of Caesar's generals, Asinius Pollio, possibly to fulfill Caesar's wishes, set up the first public library in Rome, Pollio's library, in the central part of the Roman Forum in 27 BC, which was funded by his conquest in Illyria in 39 BC, and which, as per Varro's original plan, included 2 halls, one for Greek authors in Greek, the other for Latin ones, and of course Latin, while being adorned throughout with portraits and Greek statuary to inspire readers, a model which would be repeated in later Roman libraries. Augustus Caesar then founded the Palatine Library as part of the Temple of Apollo in 28 BC, shown here. Well, that's actually this one here, the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine. And that would be the one here. So the 2 halls, one for the Greeks, one for the Latin authors, while his sister Octavia, on the 2nd floor of the portico of Octavia, that's this one you see here, on the 2nd floor founded another, the Octavian Library, which would have been here and here, one for the Roman authors, well, I should say one for the Latin authors, one for the Greek authors. Both of them open to the public and holding between 20 and 40,000 scrolls, again in 2 separate sections, as I said, one for Greek authors, one for Latin authors. Both embellished with decorative marble, artworks, and statues, run by a professional staff of scholars and slaves, and supported by state funds throughout their existence. The Palatine Library, as thought to have been depicted here in later times, but this is certainly the model of it. This, of course, is the house of Augustus, the palace himself, the Temple of Apollo, the Palatinus with the Palatine Library, which would have been here, and you can sort of see this here. It's depicted here. Anyway, the Palatine Library had a plan similar to that of Pollio's library, which most truly public, quote-unquote, libraries in the Greco-Roman world followed. A single hall about 57 by 64 feet, niches between the columns to hold bookshelves, and a step podium, kind of a dais, running along the walls to provide access to the niches. It was unfortunately burned by a mob of Christians in a riot in 363 AD, who were upset that it held pagan authors. This has to do with the news that Julian the Apostate had been killed, assassinated on the orders of the new Emperor Jovian. So, in a sense, let's go and get all the pagan stuff. Tiberius built the Temple of Augustus to his deified predecessor, Divus Augustus, in the space between the Palatine and Capitoline hills, behind the Basilica Julia. So that would be the library you see right here. This is, of course, the Palace of Tiberius. Basilica Julia is right. It's really just this part right here. Completed in August of 37 AD, which included a public library holding some 30,000 scrolls, but unfortunately this was destroyed sometime after 218 AD. You can see a reconstruction of what it would have looked like today, or back then, I should say. The Emperor Vespasian added another public library, the Bibliotheca Pacis, to the Temple of Peace, sometimes called the Vespasian Library. Temple of Peace he built in 75 AD, which held about 30,000 scrolls. And this is really what it would have looked like, a temple of peace. And it was part of the Forum of Vespasian. You can see here the regular Roman Forum is here. The Forum of, well, that's not going to be built yet, the Forum of Augustus. These will be built by Trajan and Nerva later. But the Temple of Peace. And inside, this is kind of what it would have looked like. Now, this was destroyed by fire in 191 AD, but restored by the Emperor Severus, before finally being destroyed and was hit by lightning in the 5th century. The Severan restoration, by the way, included a giant map of the city of Rome in marble on the wall, which is what is depicted here and here. The largest public library, and the largest west of Alexandria, was Trajan's Ulpian Library in his Forum on the Capitoline, as depicted here in artist's reconstruction. For the first time, readers could browse through the book stacks themselves, but they still had to consult them in one of the reading rooms. The Ulpian Library housed Latin and Greek collections in separate rooms, a typical model, on either side of a 55 by 60 foot colonnaded hall, measuring in a 2-story building with 70-foot high vaulted ceilings that brought in natural light. Didn't want to use too much in the way of fire in a lot of these libraries. As depicted here, and this is part, of course, the Forum. This is Vespasian's temple, Forum of Nerva, Forum of Augustus. And of course, up here, the Forum of Trajan. This is the Basilica Ulpia. And right here, the library on either side of the column of Trajan. Anyway, this contains some 100,000 works of history, literature, philosophy, and religion, along with copies of the entire Roman State Archive, consisting of another 100,000 scrolls, which operated probably into the 6th century until the destruction caused by Justinian's reconquest of Italy. Now, when Constantine the Great founded Constantinople as his eastern capital, his son and successor, Constantius II, founded the Imperial Library of Constantinople sometime after 340 AD as both a research and public library, along with a scriptorium where copies of all Greek and Latin works could be made and distributed to libraries across at least his half of the empire, for public use, but also to preserve knowledge in a time of war and disaster. However, several fires destroyed much of the collection, with 120,000 scrolls lost in the fire of 473, and the utter destruction of the library and everything it had in the sack of Constantinople by the Franks and Venetians of the Fourth Crusade in 1204. The expense of supporting these public libraries in Rome and throughout the empire show that rather than existing simply for the use of an educated elite, even one not quite wealthy enough to afford their own library, by the 1st century BC, the artisan classes, even the lower classes in general, at least the urban ones, were functionally literate, as evidenced in prefaces to the works by writers such as Cicero, Caesar, Pliny the Elder, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, but also in graffiti found at Pompeii and elsewhere. In other words, you're not going to write graffiti unless, of course, you know how to write, and someone other than an educated elite can read it. And once you read the graffiti that's there, you can understand why I say that. But this literate sort of artisan class also desired access to histories, literature, philosophies, and other texts found in a typical public library of the time. Additionally, these public libraries were not just places for reading and research, but also, like many public libraries today, places for public readings, recitations, and book club-like discussions of both old and new works, including those of local authors and poets. While scribal copyists had their shops nearby, able to consult the text in these libraries that were in demand for anybody who wished to purchase them. The wrap-up quote. What is the use of having countless books and libraries whose contents their owners can scarcely read through in a whole lifetime? Seneca. Let me know what you think of this quote in the comments section below. Also, what you liked about this video, and what other historical topics or subjects you'd like to see in future videos. Be sure to click like, share, especially subscribe, as it will help me bring you more great videos. And make sure to click that little bell thingy so you'll know when the next History Waits for No One video is posted. If you want to know more, there are recommended studies on this topic in the description below, along with other ways to connect with me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the past.